What separates humans from every other species on Earth? Most people would say the key difference is that we're smarter, but in this chapter, Andrew McAfee argues that it's because we're social. If this is your first time seeing a Busy Book Club video, welcome. My name is Mike, and on this channel, we read new and interesting books so we can have new and interesting ideas. Today, we're looking at the third chapter of The Geek Way by Andrew McAfee, Ultra and Ultimate, A New Way to Think About Us. This chapter starts out by dispelling a myth, the myth that we're smarter, by pointing out that in some forms of intelligence there are animals that are smarter than humans. For example, McAfee talks about chimpanzees that can perform better than humans at spatial memory tasks. So when you ask if humans are smarter than animals, it really depends on what type of intelligence you're talking about. To separate humans from animals, McAfee breaks it down into three key differences. The first one is that humans are better at learning, so much so that we actually rely on learning for survival. For example, our ancestors first learned how to make fire, and ever since then it's been passed through generations till today. We watch fire making on Survivor. It's almost a recreational thing rather than a normal need for survival. A human doesn't know how to make fire from birth. That's not innate knowledge we're born with. But we've learned it so much that our stomachs have shrunk, our jaw muscles are weaker. Unlike other animals, we can't actually survive on raw food. We need our food to be cooked. And so if the entire human population somehow lost access to the ability to make fire, or at least to cook our food, we'd be wiped out within a few days. We rely on this ability to pass down knowledge from one generation to the next. The second key difference is that we are better at large-scale cooperation. And of course, there are certain types of social insects like bees and ants that can cooperate on much larger numbers than humans, but that only happens in very large families. So when those bees and ants are cooperating, they're all genetically related to each other. But millions of humans from many, many families will cooperate together to defend a country or to fight a global pandemic. We're actually cooperating as a species rather than as genetic relatives. And then the third and final key difference is that humans have this concept of cultural evolution. Many animals have a concept of culture, like different primates and dolphins, but none of those cultures evolve over time. To talk about this, one of my favorite quotes from the book is, "The list of culture-possessing animals might actually be long, but psychologist Steve Stewart Williams drives home the key difference between all of them and us. 10,000 years ago, the pinnacle of chimpanzee culture was using twigs to extract termites from termite mounds. Today, the pinnacle of chimpanzee culture is using twigs to extract termites from termite mounds. Chimpanzee innovations like tool use are real and important, and they spread from peer to peer and from parent to child, but they don't build on each other over time." If you compare this to humans, like the history of flight, in 1783 we had our first balloon flight. In 1903, the Wright brothers made the first fixed-wing flight. Sputnik was 1957, we walked on the moon in 1969, and in 2021, the Perseverance rover launched the Ingenuity helicopter. So that was a flight on an entirely different planet on Mars. And now, humans regularly fly in commercial airplanes. We've gotten so comfortable with this idea that we complain when the Wi-Fi doesn't work. Human flight didn't exist 2 lifetimes ago. It's a very new innovation, but we have adapted to it completely. The end of chapter summary said this best: "All of these things point to the fact that humanity's superpower is at the level of the group, not the individual." Now that we understand this key difference about humans, we have to ask, how do we understand culture? And how do we make it relevant to large organizations? One of the experiments that Andrew McAfee talked about that I found very, very fascinating was this one that was done by psychologists John Darley and Daniel Batson. They did an experiment with Princeton Seminary students. They had each of them give a short talk, but to get to the lecture hall, they had to first check in at an office, and then they would be directed through an alley. In the alley, there would be an actor laying down, pretending to be in distress. So this actor was in on the study. And then the question is, who stops and helps the person? And the researchers tried this a few different ways. Some students were asked to give a career talk, and others had to give a talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan. And if you don't know about the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's actually very similar to the experiment itself, and it's supposed to teach altruism regardless of a religion. And shockingly, there wasn't a big difference between these groups, but what did cause a difference is what happened at the check-in. When students checked in, some of them were told that they are late and they need to hurry, and then others they were told that they had plenty of time, they had a few extra minutes. So what happened between these two groups of students? Of the students that were told they were late, only 10% stopped to help. If they had an extra few minutes though, a whopping 63% stopped. So I think what McAfee is pointing out here is the difference between values and norms. The parable of the Good Samaritan is supposed to teach you a value, but what really drives culture is norms. If you want to get more people to adhere to a norm, you have to make it observable and reduce the idea of plausible deniability. Basically, you can't give them the opportunity to say, oh, I didn't see the guy, or oh, I didn't think he needed help. Because from the perspective of the seminary students, everyone knows if they're late or if they're on time, but no one really knows about the man in the alley. It's possible for them to say that they didn't see him or that he didn't exist or whatever. The norm is what actually has power rather than a value. Reading this part of the chapter actually reminded me again of No Rules Rules. I know I've mentioned it for 3 videos in a row, but I have to point it out. In that book, Reed Hastings talks about Netflix's decision to do away with a formal vacation policy. He talked about how other companies tried to implement the same thing, but it totally didn't work. When there was no vacation policy, no one took any vacation. And he said that it really came down to the leaders modeling the right behavior. If you want to have employees take vacation to really reset and get new ideas, the CEO and other managers at the firm, they need to model that behavior. They need to set the norm for the rest of the organization. If you put this in McAfee's words, the behavior, this norm, had to be observable by leadership. I think all of this culminated in the final sentence of the chapter. Here's the ultimate geek ground rule. Shape the ultra-sociality of group members so that the group's cultural evolution is as rapid as possible in the desired direction. If an organization is going to be successful, leadership must be intentional about how they shape the culture. So overall, I really liked this chapter. It was fascinating to get a view into how organizational psychology emerges from the decisions of individuals. If you also like this chapter, please leave a like. The next 4 chapters cover the norms that we mentioned earlier in the book: science, ownership, speed, and openness. The next chapter in particular will be all about the science norm. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. Thank you, and I will see you next time.